a happy feast of St. Patrick's to all of you. Our attitudes, our beliefs, our prejudgments, our expectations have a very significant and extremely important influence on our behavior and even on the quality of the life we lead. Likes and dislikes, preferences, prejudices, beliefs, these all steer our lives. But we all too often leave them unexamined and continue in directions no longer fulfilling, no longer even pleasing to us. And the formation of attitudes of all sorts starts very early and goes on through life. And if we want to, we can change our attitudes at any period, through formal education, through deliberate changes of our behavior, sometimes if the desire is strong enough, through the sheer effort of will. But mostly we don't do this. Mostly we drift along, believing what we learned long ago, never examining, never questioning. My whole point this morning is that we might well examine, question, and perhaps change our attitudes about death, our own death and the deaths of others. Because I believe that unless we do, we can never become fully realized, fully developed person. We can never achieve identity, we can never achieve selfhood without this kind of confrontation, examination of our own death. We're very rarely taught formally, in any sense, what to think about death. The subject is rarely even discussed. But we nonetheless learn about it, and we learn very early, and we learn very well. Infants are innocent of these knowledges. All adults possess them. And our concern should be the awesome misinformation, unhealthy attitudes, false facts, spooky fears that many people accumulate and on which they act as adults. This kind of learning starts very early, in the nursery. Iona and Peter Opie, in their Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes, collected 550 nursery rhymes. 31 of these deal directly with human death. 26 of them deal with animals being killed. 2 of them deal with both. 60 altogether. 11% of nursery rhymes deal directly with death. My father died a month ago and left me all his riches, a feather bed and a wooden leg and a pair of leather breeches. There was a little man and he had a little gun and his bullets were made of lead. He went to the brook and he shot a little duck right in the middle of the head. There was a man of double deed who sowed his garden full of seed. This one goes on for about 11 verses, but it ends, and when my heart began to bleed, 'twas death and death and death indeed. Who killed Cock Robin? I said the sparrow with my bow and arrow. I killed Cock Robin. Second verse of Old Mother Hubbard. She went to the baker's to buy him some bread, and when she came back, the poor dog was dead. Or Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday. The end of the rehearsal of the week, died on Saturday, buried on Sunday, and this is the end of Solomon Grundy. Or the one that so spooked my own childhood. The last 2 lines of Oranges and Lemons, say the bells of St. Clemens. Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. This kind of thing goes on in all cultures. Probably all infants are exposed to it. I know one from the Afrikaans, Simbamba Mazakuki, translated. The last 2 lines, Simbamba Mama's baby, and so on. At the end of it, twist his neck and hit him on the head, throw him in the ditch and he'll be dead. Lullaby. The child who learns these nursery rhymes, as he learns his language, also learns through them and in many other ways learns about death. He meets it in fairy stories and nursery tales. He finds dead bugs and dead birds. He has pets that die. He learns, and we teach him. We teach him what we learn. Fears, doubts, anxieties, terrors, denials, repressions, and they serve him well. Mostly unquestioned throughout his whole life, even to his own death. Of course, the fears and doubts of dying have many sources and many roots. Some are ridiculous, some are unworthy, some are reasonable and indeed honorable. We mostly enjoy life, and we're reluctant to consider leaving. Sir Thomas Browne many years ago said, "The long habit of living ill disposeth me for dying." Engrossed in life, like children playing games at twilight, we don't want to go home when we're called. We have our fears. And the sad thing is that most of our fears are needless and can easily dissolve if we examine them. Like superstitions, they simply cannot stand adult attention. So let's look at some of our common fears about death and dying and see how they can be dissolved, how they can be dealt with, and see what mature adult consideration might do to them. Let's look at some of the sources of our fears about dying. We are dreadfully superstitious here, and we haven't got rid of our burden of primitive and medieval nonsense. We're mostly amused by our older superstitions, our simple fears of black cats and thunder on the wrong side and spilt salt. We can deal with these in an adult way. But most of us would sit the night with a dead body reluctantly and uncomfortably. And if it settled or sighed or belched, expelling trapped gases, most of us would run from the room in terror. We do believe in ghoulies and ghosties. We do believe in the malevolent returned spirits of the dead with hauntings and frights. How many of us have examined these particular fears in the light of our adult beliefs, religious or not? These fears cannot stand the mature man's examination. But we also fear our dying because we know that it is going to overtake us with projects unfinished whenever it comes, with things undone, with secrets poorly concealed. But by doing nothing to solve these problems, we only make the situation worse. Like the drunkard who drinks to escape the problems caused by his drinking. Here, of course, the prescription is clear. It's doubtful that any of us will ever carry it out fully, but we must either change our behaviors or accept the consequences. A street accident is going to reveal our undergarments. Death will set other people to sorting out our things, cleaning our rooms. Aware of that, will I keep this letter or will I throw it out? Death will find us with tasks uncompleted, perhaps tomorrow. Aware of this, will I read my Playboy or my detective novel tonight, or will I write that long overdue letter? However I choose, I may well choose either. Death should not catch me by surprise. And in the third place, we fear the deaths of others, as if death were stronger than love. And thereby, we really diminish all of our relations, adding to our fear a note of falsity, a note of denial. The knowledge that death is going to leave us here bereft will not decrease our sorrow, and it should not. But this knowledge, made conscious, faced, will increase our cherishing. We also fear death because we fear that our dying will be painful, because we have heard of painful deaths. We know that we set out on this journey by ourselves, and we fear that we shall die alone. We're afraid of the dark. We're afraid of silence. And these fears were reasonable throughout most of man's history. People did die in pain. They did and do die alone. Rooms at night were poorly lit, filled with shadows. William Sidney Porter, who wrote under the name of O. Henry, last recorded words, "Turn up the lights, I don't want to go home in the dark." Goethe's last words, "More light." But the truth is that we have developed the management of pain to an extraordinarily high degree, and most physicians share these concerns with us. We mostly die in hospital, and there, by talking freely and openly with our doctors of medicine, we'll find that they can say, and will say, I can guarantee you that your death will not be painful. I can promise you that you will not die alone. And any nurse or orderly has in the view of man's long history of darkness, the miracle of electrical lights, and can flood the room with lighting at the touch of a switch, and can drive away silence with a radio. These fears are outdated. They're real only if they're hidden and not talked about, not discussed openly and freely with our physicians. We also think carelessly that we want immortality. We sometimes do, in a kind of superstitious way, wish that we could be immortal. We think that we would like to be deathless. Yet we've always known that without death, life becomes insupportable, unbearable. When the pagan gods gave immortality to any human being, it was always a curse, and ended as a mercy by transformation finally to a grasshopper, a cricket, something that died. Jonathan Swift's Stoltbrogs, who did not die, became in their deathless years repulsive and loathsome. Ahasuerus, the wandering Jew, and the Flying Dutchman were punished terribly by their inability to die. None of us would give up death, really, had we the choice. None of us would give it up. And yet we fear it and postpone even consideration of our own dying. Of course, perhaps some of our reluctance lies in our simple desire to know how things are going to turn out. I want to see future presidential elections. We want to see our grandchildren. I would like to see how they celebrate New Year's Eve at the turn of the century, the start of a new millennium. We are curious about the future. For this reluctance, I have no cure. But all of these fears can be faced, can be dealt with, and they dissolve. Jeremy Taylor, 300 years ago, gave us the prescription, which has been often repeated by others, the prescription for dealing with our fears of dying. Daily confrontation with our own death. He that would die well, Jeremy Taylor said, he that would die well must always look for death. Every day, knocking at the gates of the grave, and then the gates of the grave can never prevail upon him to do him mischief. The English prayer book, make us ever mindful of the time when we must lie down in the dust. Constant confrontation, awareness of our own dying. But I've been dealing with our fears, with negative things. These have been fears that study in the art of dying could overcome. What elements could this kind of study add to the art of living? What are some of the positive things that we can say about this? Experimental scientific work in the last 10 years or so has added to our knowledge here, and pretty surprisingly. Studies are now accumulating at a rapid rate, and they show that certain attitudes and certain beliefs about dying promote survival in death-threatening situations. That these same attitudes and behaviors halt or slow or sometimes even reverse disease processes. That these attitudes and behaviors prolong life. We might look at some of the studies that have been done briefly. There's a new theory of disease. Not really new, but a theory that's gaining in ascendancy now, instead of the theory of specific etiology. The older theory was that you have a healthy organism. Along comes the causative agent of a disease, and you've got a diseased organism. You're healthy, along comes a virus, and you get the flu. Well, it turns out that it's very likely not this kind of thing at all. That we are, all of us, under constant bombardment by the etiological factors in disease. That we are surrounded by viruses, microbes, all of the disease agents. And that by a kind of resistance, we as hosts are able to fend these off. And that disease occurs, even fatal disease, when our resistance is lowered. The best example of this kind of thing, if I can very quickly go over it, is the cold sore, herpes simplex. The virus is present in 98% of our mouths. All of you have at the moment, excepting for a small handful, have the virus of the cold sore in your mouth at the present time. When you get a cold sore, Not when this virus comes along, when you kiss somebody with the virus in his mouth. You get it when you get a cold, and your resistance is low. The British call them fever blisters. You get it when you get a fever, and your resistance is low, especially the resistance at the juncture between the mucosa and the skin. They can be produced by hypnosis, lowering the resistance. They also occur, some women get them on the eve of their honeymoon, or before their senior prom, this kind of thing, looming out in a great disfiguring cold spell. Psychological conditions, other words, can also produce them. Well, the same is turning out to be true of a great many diseases that have been studied. The most surprising study that was done was one by Schmale and Engel on cancer of the cervix, and it can stand as typical of many of these studies. 100 or so women admitted to hospital because they had positive pap smears, suspicion in the doctor's office of the cancer of the cervix, admitted to hospital to have a biopsy done, a snippet of tissue taken out and examined under microscope to see whether or not a malignancy was present. While they were in hospital, Schmale and his associates interviewed each one of these women, looking for two factors based on some of their other work. Did the woman in the preceding 12 months suffer a significant severance of a social relationship? Husband died, divorced, moved to another town and left the friends behind, son drafted, sent to Vietnam, daughter got married, some severance of a significant social relationship. And secondly, did she respond to this with feelings of despair, despondency, hopelessness, giving up? If both of these were present, Schmale said she's got cancer of the cervix. If both of these were not present, he said she does not have. He was correct in his predictions, both positive and negative predictions, 75% of the cases. Psychiatric interview is a better diagnostic tool in cancer of the cervix than the pap smear. Despondency, despair, giving up after severance of a social relationship, associated with the appearance of cancer of the cervix. The same kind of thing has been implicated in a great variety of diseases: first attack of asthma, first appearance of active tuberculosis, lupus erythematosus, brucellosis, for heaven's sakes, undulant fever with a known causative agent. A great variety of diseases. Entering Radcliffe freshmen, all took the multiphasic, MMPI, paper and pencil personality test. 26 of them got the Asiatic flu in the fall and winter of '68. Psychologists did a brief study. Half of them got over their flu in 2 weeks or less. Half of them had it for 3 weeks or more in the health service. Went back and looked at their multiphasics as long as 6 months before. Those whose flu hung on more than 3 weeks were significantly more depressed in the multiphasic 6 months before. Depression prolonging Asiatic flu. David Backen study. Inject 2 large groups of rats with a carcinogen that will give every one of them a fatal skin cancer. Raise half of them in ordinary laboratory cages, food, light, water, everything laid on, about 10 or 12 to a cage. Raise the other half in similar cages, but once a day take each rat out of its cage. Give each one a name. Talk to it, pet it, stroke it, make a pet of it, teach it tricks, let it run around your body, carry it in your lab coat. Do this once a day with it. All of them are going to die of skin cancer, but those that grow up as rats get their skin cancers faster and die of them sooner than those that grow up as pets. Relationship between a rat and a man, staving off an inevitable cancer, staving off, holding off inevitable death. Studies of disasters, lifeboat situations, people trapped by blizzards, fires, earthquakes, floods, all of these. Interview with survivors. Show that the principal factor in the art of survival is doing something about it. Keeping up your morale, refusing to let yourself get depressed, and doing something, even if what you do is useless. Prisoner of war studies. What is the art of survival after 3 years of torture and imprisonment by the Japanese in World War II? What led to survival or non-survival in the Korean War situation? Morale. Refusing to let yourself be depressed. Refusing to sit there and wait for rescue. Continuing to prosecute the war, bring it to the enemy. Bollocksing their rules. Trying to escape. Physical exercise. And morale. Experiences in hospitals. different kinds of hospitals. Those hospitals that have programs of enforced activity, noise, bustle, making your own beds, coming down to dining room for meals, even in wheelchair, even on litters, higher rates of survival. All of the studies that have been done add something to our knowledge about dying. Summarized briefly, they tell us that depression is a dangerous and life-threatening condition, that hope is necessary for life. They tell us that struggle against death can stave it off, and that giving up can hasten it. Despair, despondency, and giving up hastens death. All of the studies, and there are many of them, tell us that sheer activity, physical activity and exercise, however difficult they may be, are life-saving, and that mental and social activity, mental and social engagement, involvement, can halt and sometimes even reverse deterioration and decline. They point to the importance in our lives of noise and bustle and light and constant influx of stimulation. And these studies also can set each one of us to insist on these as factors, to do them for ourselves under all conditions of health and at all ages, to fight against depression, to maintain our health, to be active, to struggle, and to surround ourselves with stimulation. But the greatest contribution that a steady awareness of death can make to life is the gift of love. Quite simply, we cannot know life to its fullest without death. And love itself is intensified and enriched by death. Both of these things deserve a little more attention. Life has many purposes, and we pursue many goals. There are only a limited number of books we can read, a limited number of countries we can explore. We can savor only so many sights and sounds, and we can learn only a limited knowledge and wisdom. What we can accomplish can be measured, and indeed it will be. And we must each of us early take the measure of our powers, sharpen them, and then, with disability and death before us, we must establish our priorities. We are led to this task sooner and better if we know that death too soon puts a period to all of our strivings and shows us the true worth of all of our possessions. It's very healthy for each of us, a very healthy exercise, to wander through our rooms regularly, noting that there is nothing in them that will not have to be disposed of someday by somebody. Walk round and look at your things. Perform the exercise of imagining someone else disposing of them. There's a great deal to get rid of them. Walter de la Mare said this with regard to things. He said, "Look thy last on all things lovely every hour. Let no night close thine eyes in deathly slumber, till to delight thou hast paid thine utmost blessing. Since that all things thou wouldst praise, beauty took from men who loved them in other days." And amongst all our goals and all our purposes, I think myself that the greatest goal of life, of course, is our transformation from a near nothing, as we are born, to a complete and fully developed person. And this goal is accomplished only in relationships with other persons. And here it is that death makes its greatest gift. The sure and present, ever-present awareness that I shall die, and I shall die sooner than I would wish, and that others are moving as quickly and as surely to the same grave. This knowledge enhances all human activities, increases all human relations, from that of casual acquaintance to that of deepest love. Without death's termination, love is not complete. And this teaches us that we do not have time for casualness, for thoughtlessness, for selfishness in our relationships with others. If only we can learn to act as if we were going to die, then death loses much of its power over us. Then we can see that we have no time for relationships that diminish us instead of enlarging us. Then we will refuse trivial and spiteful arguments and strive continually and daily against resentment and all the other decreasing human relationships. And we can strive to lift each relationship with another person one notch higher. Stranger to encounter, casual encounter to acquaintance, acquaintance to friendship, and friendship to love. Since we know then fully that each encounter may be our last, and each parting may be the final one. And we shall see then fully and truly that relationships between human beings transcend not only place and age and distance and time, but also, in the end, transcend death itself. And we shall see then that the length of life, in terms of years or months, is not important. My memory is no longer or shorter than any man's. It extends from the present back to my infancy. And the fullness of my memory is not related to the number of years I have lived. My memory is of the same length as any man's. And this is true as well of the future. I have today, this moment. I have my dreams and my hopes. No man living has more. We can understand and appreciate life only if we understand and appreciate death. And if we put death in its proper and honorable place, and then get on with the business of living, then perhaps we can begin tentatively to explore the supernatural richness surrounding us, which man has always perceived, however dimly, and begin to realize not only our own potential, but the potential of life itself.